This is Matt Walsh kind of got in Twitter trouble.
Yeah,
Um,
shock.
yeah, for his message to Dylan Mulvaney. And Mulvaney is a transgender influencer who has done multiple things. I think he won Woman of the Year. He went viral for walking through the forest saying that it's day 66 of womanhood, and he honestly seems like a caricature of womanhood. He truly does. It does not seem like a genuine transgender individual, honestly. I don't agree with that lifestyle regardless, but this individual really seems to be overdoing it. Um, and this individual even met with Joe Biden and was advocating for, promoting access to gender transitional surgeries for minors. So that just gives you context of who Mulvaney is. So this is Walsh's original message to Dylan Mulvaney on his show that got him into trouble. So first, I'll read his initial message to him, and then I'll let you respond to that, Michael, and then we'll read out what Walsh then responded to his critics after the backlash. So here's his original message: Dylan, if that is the most attractive you will ever look, then I don't even want to imagine what you'll look like when you're at your ugliest. You do not pass as an attractive woman or as a man at all, even with 50 pounds of makeup and plastic surgery and clever lighting tricks, even when you still cannot escape what you really are and what you will always be. You have successfully shed whatever parts of you were masculine, perhaps at least on the surface. Nobody would ever describe you as masculine or manly, so you've got that going. But your femininity quotient has not increased at a rate commensurate with the loss of your masculinity. You may not be masculine, but you also aren't feminine. Instead, you are weird and artificial. You are manufactured and lifeless. You are unearthly and eerie. You are like some kind of human deep fake. That's what you are. You are a man deprived of all the best qualities of men, but without any of the best qualities of women. Even your personality is contrived. Everything about you is fake. Nothing about you rings true. Nobody buys the act. You'll never be accepted as a woman by anyone. Never by anyone. Even the people who pretend to accept you as a woman are only pretending because they're afraid of being lectured if they don't, or because they want to use you as a platform to virtue signal. But everyone who looks at you will see something pitiable and bizarre, something utterly unfeminine in every way. You will never be able to actually have the identity that you're trying to appropriate, nor will you ever be able to fully escape the identity that you're fleeing. The best you can hope for is some kind of limbo, the worst of all worlds. And yet, even in that limbo state, you will still be a man, just not one that any of us can respect or take seriously. But other than that, champ, you're doing great. So that was his initial message that got him into a firestorm on Twitter. So, what was your initial reaction to
I
that,
can
Michael? Is
see
he just a big
why.
old jerk?
I can see why. And I guess I'm not entirely sure what Matt Walsh's prerogative is for writing that.
Hmm.
If he is like he clearly has his agenda of defining a woman, and by doing so, identifying the failures and social venom that is transgenderism. He, I think, is undermining his cause in the way that he presented that,
Hmm.
because what he's doing is he's taking a full send commitment to ad hominem,
Hmm.
the fallacy of character smearing. Basically, he took, what's his name, Dylan,
Yes.
yeah, her name, his name. Um, he took Dylan's entire persona and violated it in the most public way possible in the current most public forum possible. And I don't necessarily see the benefit of that. What it does is it drives a wedge between those who agree with him and those who disagree with him or think he went too far. my perspective on whether or not he's right for that, hearing the words that he said about this person who is clearly deeply broken and deeply confused about their identity, I guess my thought is Christ wouldn't want Dylan to be torn down in his brokenness. Christ would want Dylan to find himself, and in himself, but to find salvation and understand who the Lord is through love, and in so doing be formed by the Holy Spirit to walk in a path of righteousness apart from the sins that he has committed against his own body for such a long time. So it's really challenging for me. It's challenging for me to be on Matt's side on this. Now, I'm sure he's under fire because there's a lot of hateful, angry people on Twitter who are foaming at the mouth to find a way to stick a dagger in him and let him bleed out. And he served it up for him, the opportunity. So he clearly knew what he was doing by doing that. He was not afraid of the lashback, and nor should he be. He's in that category of individuals that has transcended, I think, the social lashback of getting canceled. So Matt Walsh is uniquely uncancelable for having this position. However, that doesn't make it okay or right. It hurts my heart to think of how Dylan would feel if he were to read and take to heart what was said. I can't imagine a way that those words would cause him to choose a better path. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have thoughts, and I think that I initially was in your camp. As time went on, though, and honestly, this is kind of my personality. I'm just not a mean-spirited person, and I am not a confrontational person. However, Walsh has a interesting response here, and I guess I'll read his response before I kind of go further on my thoughts on it. So this is him responding to his critics. It's a little long, but here we go. Needless to say, I don't apologize at all, nor do I wish to amend what I say or soften my language. I said exactly what I meant to say, exactly as I meant to say it, and I stand by every single word without the slightest bit of equivocation. I will also note that I did not insult Dylan Mulvaney in that clip. I merely described him as directly and honestly as I could. If honesty sounds insulting, well, that only tells us something about the nature of what is being described. Doesn't mean that we should stop being honest about it. Indeed, we need a lot more honesty, direct to the point, brutal at times. Why is honesty and the truth brutal? Sorry, guys, this is actually transcribed, so it's a little weird here and there. Well, because the reality of what we're dealing with is brutal. It is a brutal, horrific thing. And so there is no honest way of describing it without sounding brutal yourself. We have gotten to this point where depraved lies and destructive lunacy are destroying our country and consuming entire generations of children, largely because people have been too afraid to speak honestly and to say out loud what they know to be true. We have prioritized politeness and tolerance over truth. And look at where it's gotten us. Look what it has achieved. So if you, whoever you are watching this, and if you saw the clip of me addressing Dylan Mulvaney, and you thought to yourself, "Oh, that's mean. He shouldn't have said all that." I don't necessarily disagree, but that's mean. Well, if that's your reaction, then all that tells me, then all that tells me, and what it ought to tell you about yourself, is that you are among the legions who have sacrificed truth on the altar of nice. And the destruction that has followed from that decision is your fault. Okay? This is not a victimless crime. Your cowardice is not a victimless crime. These kids who have been abandoned to lies and despair and who are killing themselves because of it, that's on you and everyone like you. Now, you can't undo the damage that your cowardice has done, but you can at least get on the right side and start fighting for the truth. Now you can stop cooperating with the harm and thereby causing harm. Get on the right side of the issue, and you need to, because we are way past the point of being able to worry about nice. I mean, that point never existed. Certainly doesn't exist now. Now is a time for truth and nothing else. So he did give a little bit more thorough response in some of his videos after that, but that's kind of the quick gist of his responding to the critics. So
Yeah.
after hearing that, Michael, what's your take on his sort of justification?
Well, I also want to read out of the chat. Susie Q said she disagrees with me. She said she thought what Walsh did was compassionate and necessary. Dylan Mulvaney is making thousands of dollars a month off his ungodly antics, and millions of people support him. So, something else to put in the mix, because I don't know anything about Dylan Mulvaney. It's
right.
I don't. I'll have you know, for those who are listening or watching, I'm processing all this live as well. I haven't prepared for this conversation, so I'm getting it all fresh. And
yeah, and that's fair.
Yeah, I'll still say, after hearing Matt's response or rebuttal after his lashback, I will still hold to the idea that I still think his argument for cultural norms against transgenderism was still built upon a fallacy in that particular case. I don't think that it was as beneficial to so viciously describe Dylan. And I say vicious, but I'm not saying that it's not truthful. So yeah, there is truth to what he is saying. But the truth is not always effective, and the truth is not always helpful. The truth is not always loving. I mean, that's something that's been explored in many different variety of things. The truth is truth, but there are many different truthful things that he could have said. So to Susie Q's point that Dylan Mulvaney is making thousands of dollars forcing his ungodliness onto people who adore him, or her as they would like to think of him, I would have preferred to hear Matt aggressively speak out in opposition to his influence rather than his perception of himself. But I don't know, because all of the viewers of Dylan Mulvaney's media are going to hear Matt Walsh and demonize him because of the particular choice he made in how to approach the situation. Whereas it's possible, and maybe I'm just speaking in ignorance, it's possible that if Matt Walsh had chosen to pick apart from an argumentative perspective, to use proper rhetoric to highlight the damage that these young people are experiencing in their lives because of their body dysmorphia and gender dysmorphia as a result of having this idol who is so clearly departed from reality of his own being and his own self-perception. I think appealing to that would have a stronger argument and be more persuasive in opposition to Mulvaney, to Dylan Mulvaney. I keep looking over here to make sure I've got his name right, but I think that would be a more persuasive argument against his influence than just to highlight the reality of what this individual is in terms of the public eye of masculinity or femininity from a purist position. So I still don't think he was as beneficial as he could have been, and I don't particularly agree with the tactics.
So I've got several things to say to that because I I really see your heart in what you're saying, and I think that I'm my initial reaction is usually where you're at right now, but I feel like I have learned in recent times, especially that there is when these type of discussions are had, especially in this type of a medium of a podcast. First, it was Matt Walsh, you know, reacting to this character. This character has been in the news for months now. And he has amassed, as Susie Q said, he's amassed a ton of money from his role as an influencer. Um, so in these mediums, Matt is speaking not necessarily to save Dylan Mulvaney, which obviously we would pray for, but once upon a reset in the chat said, how redeemable is someone who has a seared conscience? And I'm using that chat to say that it's kind of goes into my point, which is that I don't think Dylan Mulvaney is going to be saved by anything Matt Walsh says, most likely. Not
Yeah.
to say that it's impossible, but
No,
the
you're
likelihood
exactly right. Yeah.
is very small. And so ultimately what these type of debates are for is the benefit of those in the middle who are undecided or maybe who are leaning a certain way but could be convinced. And one of the things that I know Matt has talked about in response to this as well, that I didn't have the ability to pull the whole transcript because that would have been just way too long, but he has talked about the Overton window. And in fact, I believe that was mentioned in a chat just a moment ago, too. Yeah, once upon a reset, the Overton window is in play big time when it comes to how far society has fallen and how we define and redefine what depravity actually means. So now, Michael, are you familiar with the Overton window, like what it means
No.
roughly? So the
No.
Overton window is basically this is the Overton window, and everything that is within the Overton window is what is considered acceptable dialogue to talk about.
Mm.
So on the fringes of things are things that if someone said in polite society, everyone would be like, "How dare you say that?" And so to some degree, there is a play being made and has honestly been dominated by the left, where the left has moved the Overton window to the left. And
Mm.
what Walsh has even said is that he is trying to get to a point where we can re-normalize the idea that it's weird to do what Dylan Mulvaney said. And he has also mentioned a point that he's mentioned in the longer response that he said, many of my critics say, Matt, you seem angry. And he said, I am angry. I am angry that there are people like Dylan Mulvaney that amass a bunch of influence and go to the White House and tell Joe Biden that he needs to do a better job of getting minors access to these gender transition surgeries, which are irreversible. I don't care who says that they're not. I think that they are irreversible. Maybe some things can be healed to a degree, but there's no reversing all of the effects of that kind of drastic procedure. And so he is definitely attempting to shift the Overton window, which is a lot of where his harshness comes from. And in addition to that, he did a good job of reminding the audience that Dylan Mulvaney is not a victim in this. I mean, obviously, we could say he's a victim in regards to we believe that there is a darker force. We believe in an enemy that is the father of all lies, and Dylan is succumbed by these lies. But at the end of the day, he is an adult that is making this choice that is now trying to advocate for more children to fall down this trail. And that's where we can look to scriptures and say, the millstone,
Mhm.
we should not lead children astray. It's better for a millstone to be tied around a person's neck. And so to some degree, there is a righteous anger, I think, that Walsh is having. Now we could argue tactics, but I think less confrontational individuals like you and I are quick to think about, oh, well, that's not going to make Dylan feel good or Dylan's audience feel good. But I believe Matt is sending this message knowing that he's not going to reach Dylan. He's hoping to reach and renormalize, essentially stigmatizing Dylan's lifestyle because it
Mhm.
used to be stigmatized just like 5 years ago in our culture.
Yeah. Well, hear me, please, when I say I am not defending Dylan, and I am not protecting his autonomy or choices, and certainly either his salvation or his judgment will be by the hand of the Lord and not my own or Matt Walsh. I also am not thinking that Matt Walsh should play the Jesus character necessarily.
Right.
I think I want to be clear that the point of my argument that his methods are not as effective as they could have been is on a basis of his influence. And he's limiting his influence to those who are at most risk by creating a greater division where he's pushing people further away, where I think he would be more effective identifying the evidence of the abuse and manipulation that Dylan has to the people that he is influencing because of his actions. And even in the chat here, what Shara Joel said, as a woman, I'm disgusted that Dylan's idea of girlhood is crying for no reason, buying clothes he couldn't afford, and being passive aggressive. Any other man would be branded a misogynist.
Yep.
That, I think, is a much more relevant and effective line of argument than writing a character piece on how Dylan should feel about himself or perceive his own condition of masculinity or femininity.
Yeah.
So that's my argument, is that
Yeah.
I just don't think Matt Walsh was as effective as he could have been.
And real quick, I will insert and say that I realize you're not nearly as familiar with Matt's other work as I am. I follow him a lot closer because, and for those of you who are, fairly new to our format still, Michael does not keep up with the news very much. Oftentimes he's responding to things as I am laying them out. I'm kind of more of the individual who's aware of the news, whereas Michael is much more focused on the academics of theology. And so we kind of try to pair our gifts together in that regard. And part of the show is the fact that Michael is someone who is not constantly keeping up on the news, but is able to have these conversations. And I think that's fruitful to see someone work it out kind of in real time, oftentimes in these conversations. So that being said, I'm way more familiar with Matt's work, and
I know
I will
he's done
say
a lot
that
to build the argument outside of this particular.
yes, exactly. And that was my point, is everything that you're kind of criticizing him of in that regard, I can say that he's covered those bases, but obviously it's in this context with everything I've given you.
I'm worried that the division that comes from this particular instance will undermine the effectiveness of his arguments that he's already made elsewhere.
Yeah, and I can see the fear of that. I would also say that something I've been thinking about a lot lately because of this, because there are a lot of individuals who I also follow and respect that were also like saying kind of similar to what you were saying about Walsh. And I was really thinking about it. And to be honest, I think kind of like you mentioned earlier about how we're not all called to do the same thing. I think that every tool belt needs a hammer, and Matt Walsh is a hammer. And to guys like me, who is more of a, I don't know, a straight edge, or or an X-Acto knife maybe, um we can't understand the hammer all the time. But I'm doing my best to, because I will say that for Matt Walsh's part, he has been one of the most effective people actually successfully pushing back against this. And that was something he brought up, talking about renormalizing the stigmatization of these lifestyles. He has said, yeah, I want people to think that Dylan Mulvaney is weird, because he is. And Matt released his documentary, What is a Woman? And he followed it up with an expose on Vanderbilt Hospital, who are doing transitions for children, basically under the table. And they basically said, well, it wasn't under the table, but they basically said that they were only doing it because it was a big cash cow. And we talked about that in a very early episode of our show. And now, as a result of a lot of the pressure directly from Matt Walsh and the movement he's been starting, Tennessee, at the start of the show, we talked about they banned these all-age drag shows and gender transition surgeries. Mississippi immediately followed Tennessee. And I believe that there are several other states that are actively working to do these things. And Matt Walsh was actually invited to speak in Mississippi during the signing, because basically he's being credited as the main guy pressuring these individuals to actually ban these things. So that's where like there's this hard struggle of, I completely feel you, because I'm that way too, where I'm not so blunt. But then you also look and say, what is actually being effective? And yes, he's probably not being effective at reaching Dylan Mulvaney, but he's being effective at stopping a lot of the evil actions that Dylan Mulvaney is advocating for, actively advocating for. And so, and to some degree, he's put himself in opposition to Dylan Mulvaney and has made it to where he's basically closed the drawbridge on a relationship with Dylan, in exchange for being able to stop Dylan from hurting more children with his influence. And
well, I think
it's
it's safe to say
essentially a
that they're never
battle.
going to be buddies.
Right. And I guess what it really is he stepped in the ring to pick a fight with Dylan, because he felt like Dylan was being an abuser. And as Susie Q pointed out in the chat, I honestly, he's pointed out in his past episodes the same thing. He's honestly misogynistic in the way he portrays what being a woman is. He does say things that would honestly be really offensive if I was a woman, because he's saying, whoa, what womanhood is being emotional and being afraid of bees and buying clothes that I can't afford. And, it's a caricature. And so to some degree, this is a guy that's abusing his platform. And I think Matt Walsh was like, all right, fine, I'm going to clock you. And you and I, who are not the type of people that want to go and throw hands, are quick to be like, cringe at it. But then when you look at the downstream results, it's like, it's hard to argue with it. Not to say that, Dylan doesn't also need someone to reach out to him. But unfortunately, I'm sure that there are people that already have that probably were not successful. But go ahead.
No, it comes down to my limited perspective on what all Dylan is and does. I also, like, my instinct is to say I'm not in opposition to everything else Matt Walsh has done. And certainly he's not been nice all the time either. The idea of the hammer, it makes me think of Ben Shapiro's description of Donald Trump, that he's a hammer looking for a nail, and sometimes he hits a nail, and sometimes he hits a baby. That's how he describes Donald Trump all the time. And I think it'd be better to hit the nails more than the babies. And
of course,
if you want to put Matt Walsh into that idea, of course, is a stretch. But I'm not saying that what he's done is not been effective. I'm not saying that his net value isn't great.
Right.
I'm just saying I don't think it is a net positive. In this particular instance, it's hard to see the benefit. And maybe God's working in that. We need people who are sharper edged and willing to be harsh.
Yeah.
And I would even, this is neither here nor there, but I would say that I'm very confrontational by nature, more so than most people that I have in my life. And I'm usually one to jump out and take it on the chin, but also dish it out as well. I just don't know the context well enough. And maybe if I got to know the work of Dylan Mulvaney, I might feel differently. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think that's just my initial reaction, is that I think not about what I think less about what Dylan thinks of this than of what all of the thousands of kids who are being persuaded to identify with him are feeling about it. That's I think more of my heart, and why initially it's unpleasant, and I disagree with I disagree with the tactics, but I don't have the full picture either. So how can I
Yeah.
make a better plan?
Yeah. And that's fair. And I was hoping to get your, your initial take, your initial reaction, unfiltered. And
You got it.
because it's helpful, because I think many people are going to listen to only that snippet, and that's what you're talking about. If they listen to just that one snippet, are they going to be damaged? And some might be, but hopefully enough people can kind of look through and get full context, because I think in context it's a lot more understandable. Because if you don't know who Dylan is, you might think, oh, that's really harsh. But if you knew who Dylan is, well, you might not think it. Or if you knew
Yeah.
everything Matt Walsh has said in the past, you might not think it. But
For
I know
Dylan to
Susie
have the
Q.
platform that he has, he clearly has enough people empathizing with him that there are a lot of other people that take an attack against him as an attack against themselves. And maybe that's good. Maybe they need to be roughed up a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's hard to tell.
it is hard to tell, and we'll see as this train that our culture is on keeps chugging.
Mhm.
But Susie Q had said, "We don't hear you defending Dylan. You think a different approach would have been more effective, and it's possible that you are correct." And I think that that's just good to read out there. And then Once Upon a Reset
Thanks.
said, "The Word of God has already given us a standard. How close/far are we going to stray from this established standard?" Then Shara said, "Look up detransition stories online. They are heartbreaking. Maybe if someone had told them the cold, hard truth, they might have made different decisions." And
Yeah, sure
that's
enough.
exactly it. That's exactly where I think there is some positive um, results from blunt truth. But